Okay, you're on. Cool.
Okay. Now
Good.
share screen.
Yep, now you can share a screen. You can do whatever you'd like now.
Okay, where's your screen?
You are now the host.
Where is here it is. Share screen. Here we are. Do we all see this?
Yes.
Sir.
Okay. So this morning we read the Haftarah from the Navi. What book did we read from?
Malachim.
You say Malachim. What do you say?
Malachim.
What do you say? Binyamin.
What was the question?
Oh.
I think your question, I think what you're looking for is.
I said this
maybe
morning the
Malachim
Haftarah
Aleph.
was from the beginning of what book?
I think you're looking for Malachim Aleph.
Okay. I don't know if that's what you would have said unprompted. But
Unclear.
okay. So in all Hebrew sources through the 16th century, Book of Samuel is one book, Shemuel. Book of Kings is one book, Malachim. Book of Chronicles is one book, Divrei Yamim. Incidentally, Divrei Yamim is the longest book of the Bible.
Right.
So the earliest material evidence of the existence of this book, of any of these books, is in Qumran. So the Samuel scroll from Qumran, these aren't great images. They're not color. Well, I guess the next one is color. That's a much better image. The Great Samuel scroll, this is a scroll on Gevil. In Hebrew, as you can see, that obviously the letters in Hebrew have changed a little in the last 2,000 plus years, but they haven't changed that much because, I mean, you could say many becauses, but certainly one of the reasons is the concern, both halachic and just in general of respect for the texts of the continuity of the holy texts in Judaism. Other alphabets have changed much, much more and are completely unreadable from that time, but you can still see the words. Ve'allah ha'ish yikach lach mikol. You can see this is Asi hatov beinayach. If you recognize this, this is from the first chapter of Shmuel, from the Haftarah of Rosh Hashanah. And this is the same scroll. This is from the second chapter of Bein Shaul Uvein Beit David v'David something. Holech v'Gadela. So unfortunately, we don't actually, because the scroll survives in fragmentary form, we don't have the point where it shifts over. That would have been a great image showing you the shift over point between what we now call Aleph and Bet. But still, just seeing that they're in the same scroll, this shows it's one book. Get to the Talmud, the Brisa in the first chapter of Bava Basra, Sidra and Shel Neviim, Yoshua v'Shoftim, Shmuel Malachim, Yirmiyah v'Yechezkel, Yeshaya u'Shnei Masar. There are 8 books of Neviim. Each of those Shmuel Malachim are one. Sidra and Shel Ksuvim Brus, v'Sefer Tilim, v'Iyov Mishlei Koelas, Shir Shirim, Kinos, Daniel, Megillas, Esther, Ezra, v'Divrei HaYomim also one. Anyone notice what is potentially missing that you might have expected from today?
I think Nehemiah.
Nehemiah, right. In today's printed Bibles, Nehemiah is a separate book, and here it's not listed because it's part of Ezra. Chazal even ascribe importance to the number of books in Tanakh. Amar Reb Levi, Amar Reb Shimon ben Lakish. This is from the Midrash Tanchuma. The Tanchuma literature, we call it part of Sifrut Chazal, but in fact, it's from post-Talmudic period. You see, it's quoting Amoraim or Shlakish, but certainly the form in which we have it today is Tanchuma literature, and there are a number of Tanchumas, and they're 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th centuries, probably like more 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th. It's the pasuk says Vayitenel Moshe kechaloto ledaber ito. When he finished speaking to him, it's written kechaloto is kechalato, like his bride. So apparently this was a custom at the time that brides would wear 24 types of jewelry. Great. The scholar has to be pikeach v'zariz, has to be really fluent in the 24 books. Incidentally, I've always thought it would be cool as a wedding ornament to have 24, that the bride wears 24 items of jewelry, each one inscribed with the name of a book of Tanakh. Now, what do you see here? This is the famous Keter Amsova, the Aleppo Codex from Tiberius in the 10th century. What do you see here? Can anyone look at the screen and tell me will you see the opening words of 2 Kings are Vayivsha Moav b'Yisrael acharei moth Ahav. Do you see any break? Do you see anything? Scott's looking.
No. I see how there's a parsha, but not.
Where's the parsha?
Yeah, it's a stuma of it.
Where's the stoma?
Before Achav, Achazavahu ben Achav.
That's not the first verse of 2 Kings. The first verse of 2 Kings is Vayivsha Moav b'Yisrael acharei moth Ahav. I put a little red arrow. What do you see there?
Okay, it's no.
Nothing. It's the amount of space between words, and not even a particularly wide space. Now, you could say that the parsha breaks. We know that there's a lot of, as the Rambam writes, I've seen a lot of variation in different svarim. Let's see some other manuscripts. Leningrad Codex. What do you see here? Anyone?
No break.
No break. Same break before Achazyahu ben Achav, right? Yeah. Good. It's just the Sof Pasuk. No break in the narrative. This parsha is talking about, we're going through the various kings, and within the book, it goes through each king of Judah and each king of Israel, and it dates everything because it says that such and such king of Judah started reigning in year X of such and such king of Israel and reigned so many years and did what was bad or what was good in the sight of the Lord. Usually it was bad, and these are the events, and this is what happened, and then he died. And then it goes to, and this king of Israel started reigning in year X of this king of Judah, and he always did what is bad in the eyes of the Lord. And then he did these events happen, and he died. So the parsha of Achaziah starts here. Ahaziah, son of Ahab, began to reign in Israel when? In the 17th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah. Fine. He reigned only 2 years over Israel. There's not that much stated about him. The story is that he served Baal, worshipped him, provoked the Lord God of Israel according to all that his father had done. And Moab rebelled against Israel after the death of Ahab, and Ahaziah fell down through the lattice. Fine. It just continues straight. There's no break at all. So why is there a break in today's books? So the Septuagint is the name that we give to, it's the translation of Hebrew books, but it's really to the Bible of the Greek-speaking Jews in Alexandria in the 3rd to 2nd centuries BCE. So it starts with, we call it the Septuagint. Septuaginta means 70 in Latin. corresponding to hebdomekonta in Greek, because of the story of the 70 sages who translated the Torah for King Ptolemy. Now, according to that story, they translated only the 5 books. Nonetheless, the term Septuagint became a term for the greater Greek Bible because the corpus grew as other books were translated from Hebrew. And we see that these are certainly the books that we know. Of course, we said the Torah, but also, Yoshua, Shoftim, but also other books such as Ben Sira, 1 Maccabees, were also translated into Greek and became part of their library, their Biblia, which just means books in Greek. Jews of Alexandria spoke Greek. They wrote in Greek. We have all sorts of fragments that survive from before 135 CE. We don't know what happened after that time. Nicholas Delange, who is a scholar of Jewish Greek in general, notes that many of them became Christians. This is surely so. And the remainder, again, we don't know what happened to them, but Delange hypothesizes that they distanced themselves from the Greek language, stopped writing in it, and in general from that Alexandrian form of Judaism, and became closer to other forms of Judaism, such as our Judaism, Rabbinic Judaism. Certainly hundreds of years later, when what's it called? When you get to the time of Saadia's from Egypt, and he's writing in Hebrew and Arabic. He's certainly totally part of the Rabbinic Judaism. So we are not them. We're not theirs. We're not their spiritual descendants, intellectual descendants, cultural descendants. We may be their biological descendants, because if they got absorbed back into the rest of the Jewish people, then we have some of their DNA. So Chazal actually recognize them. Chazal recognize the existence of them. There's the Brisa in the Bavli, which talks about the Dioplaston shel Alexandria shel Mitzrayim, the double stoa of this great synagogue in Alexandria, where it was so large they would have to Amen. It was such a large shul that they would have to wave a flag so people would know to say Amen. So this is Kavodan Shal Yisrael. Chazal certainly, they know about them, but again, they're not us. We don't. Jews such as Philo do not get quoted in our tradition until the modern period. Who does preserve them? Well, first of all, what is there? So as we said, Greek translations of Tanakh. We said other books of the Greek Bible. We said translations of Rebbe, Ben Sira, 1 Maccabees, Judith, Tobit. Other books written originally in Greek as part of their library, part of their Bible, such as 2 Maccabees. Again, Judith and Tobit, we don't know exact. No, Tobit, I think we know was written in some Semitic language. There's other writings of Philo, all sorts of fragments of other writers. Who preserves them? The Christian church, because the very first Christians are Jews, but even the first Gentile Christians are, where do they get their Bible from? They speak Greek. They're getting their Bible from the Greek Jews. It's the Bible, the Biblia, the books of the Greek Jews. So they have the writings of Philo, they have writings of Josephus, who was not from Alexandria, not from that culture, but because he was in Rome and wrote for Gentiles in Rome, and in the empire in general, he wrote in Greek. Again, they preserved that, but not by the subsequent generations of
Wait,
Jews.
sorry. When is the last time? Do we have any form or idea of the largesse of the community? Let's say in Philo's time.
What do you mean by the largesse?
Like how significant it was, how many people were there,
There was a lot of people. It seems it was very significant. Josephus writes that when Titus was waging war against Jerusalem, he was really concerned, and he didn't actually want his soldiers to destroy the temple, because he says it wasn't just the Jews of Judea and Galilee who would be really angry, but there was potential of, as he says, all throughout the Eastern Empire, and mainly Egypt, of Jews not paying taxes to try to punish the empire for destroying the temple. So there's certainly a force that had to be dealt with.
And presumably it was a significant event that they weren't paying taxes, meaning it had real economic effect. Otherwise,
Chorban Abayis?
no.
Oh, you mean the fact that if they would stop, that would matter?
Yes.
Yes, that would matter.
Obviously.
I mean, and look, we saw how Chazal say, I mean, they describe it in exaggerated terms. There was Shishim Rebo in the shul. But still, that's reflecting. It's an exaggeration, but it's reflecting what a large, significant community it was.
Mm-hmm.
And even Chazal mentioned Greek books. We see there's the Sugya and Megillah. Can you write Sfarim, Sifrei Torah, Nevi'im, Ksum? Can you write them in other languages? Because we say Mezuzahs, Tefillin, you can't. And there's the question: Can you write the Sfarim in Greek? So they say writing in other languages. What did they allow? Only Greek, not B'chol Lashon. And Rabbi Yehuda says, even Greek, it was only the 5 books of the Torah, what we were talking about, the story with the 70. Chazal are aware of scrolls of Tanakh, at least of Chumash, in Greek, and they are at least grudgingly okay with it. Now, here's where it starts to get really interesting. What were Greek books written on? Can someone read this? Binyamin, can you read this?
Sure. So long as papyrus was the material and the roll the form in common use for literary purposes, it was impossible to include works of very great extent in a single volume. Very large rolls were cumbersome to use and perhaps were liable to be torn more easily than those which were lighter and shorter in any case. A length of 20 to 30 feet is the greatest to which a single roll attains. Consequently, works of any great length could not be contained in a single roll, that had to be divided into a number of rolls. No papyrus roll of Homer hitherto discovered contains more than 2 books of the Iliad.
Right. Now, what material is being used in Eretz Yisrael for Hebrew books, mainly?
Parchment.
So no, parchment doesn't really exist yet. Even their cloth isn't what we call parchment. But it is, let us use the general term, hides, animal hides, which are stronger and allow for larger books. This is a matter of the technology that when you move to Greek, you're not just changing the language, you're also moving to another material, and the other material affects the length, as we say, more liable to be torn. It's mashal mahadavar doma. In the other direction, when we moved from books to ebooks can contain much more data than print books, right? In a reader the size of a print book, you can contain far, far more than one print book. This is the opposite. The translation is a translation not just of language, but as we say, technology. So look, books 1 to 2 of the Iliad, when you put them together, is 10,560 Greek words. Book of Samuel in Greek is 38,061 Greek words. There's no way this is going to fit on one papyrus scroll.
How many words are the what's the longest length of any of the Chumshei Torah?
Less. Bereshis is the longest. I have. I made a list somewhere of the. I may even have it somewhere further down. But it's shorter. The longest book is Divrei Yamim,
Right.
and then I think Malachim, Shmuel, Tehillim, Yirmiyahu, and then Bereshis. I think that's the order. So here's a list of books contained in Greek Bibles. We don't have any from the ancient Greek-speaking Jews. As I said, that community eventually it either disappeared or stopped being, meaning whether it disappeared by converting to Christianity or whether it disappeared by being rabbinized. We don't have them. We are not them. And what is of them is preserved through Christians. So Christians, though, preserve. We have a list of the canon from this early Christian, died around 180 CE. That is, of course, only about 130 years after 140 years after the beginning of what we know as Christianity. So he says, accordingly, when I came to the east and reached the places where these things were preached and done, and learnt accurately the books of the Old Testament, I set down the facts and sent them to you. Unclear when he's going to the east. Is he going to Christians? Is he going to Jews, meaning Greek-speaking Jews? We don't know. But these are their names. Can you read?
Okay. The 5 books of Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Numbers, Leviticus, Deuteronomy.
Okay, that's 5.
Okay. Joshua, the son of Nun, Judges, Ruth, 4 books of kingdoms.
Basileon, Tessera. Of the kingdoms, 4.
The 2 books of Chronicles.
Paralipomenon, duo. Of the things left over, that's what they call the Divrei Yamim in Greek.
The Psalms,
2, yeah, okay.
The Psalms of David.
Okay.
Proverbs of Solomon. And
Okay.
Wisdom.
Ooh, and his wisdom. Do you know that book?
Because it could be one. It could be just an extended name of.
It could be, but it could also. We know there is a book called The Wisdom of Solomon, which is in the Greek Bible.
Ecclesiastes, the Song of Songs, the prophets,
Job,
the prophets Isaiah, Jeremiah, the 12 in a single book.
Ton dodeka en monobibloi, the in one book of the 12.
Okay, Daniel, Ezekiel, Ezra.
What's missing?
Well,
Okay,
a number of things.
What's the number of things? What?
Where are all the Apocrypha?
Well, we said maybe the Wisdom of Solomon.
Maybe, but what happened to all the Maccabees?
That is a good question. And whom is he going? And who are these people he is going to? Maybe they don't consider these the Old Testament. Maybe they consider them non-canonical. What? That is a really good point. That is a really good point.
Obviously,
Scott mentions Nehemiah as separate, though
right.
You could say they could have had it as part of Ezra as we do.
Right.
But note there's no Samuel.
And it's not clear, obviously, what 4 books of kingdoms are, unless
we're gonna see.
Yeah.
But there's also no Esther. No Esther.
Yes.
Right? No Esther.
right? Yeah.
Yes.
Well, yes, that we know.
Go check for the go to the names of the hosts. Yeah, it could be as like 4 books of kingdoms, could be including Samuel as part of
So we're going to see that. But where's Esther? Esther's a good point, and you raise a good point. No Maccabees, no Tobit. It's a very interesting list. Also, why doesn't Melito have 2 books of Jeremiah? Remember, we said Yirmiyahu is a really long book.
Mm-hmm.
So remember, we had to count by Greek words. There are differences between the Septuagint and the Masoretic text of the Tanakh, and scholars study these. But in Yirmiyahu, the differences are to such an extent that the text of Yirmiyahu is actually significantly shorter. It's only about 80% of the length. If the text had been as long in Greek as it is in Hebrew today, maybe they would have split it into 2 rolls. And Melito would have encountered 2 books, and this could have been passed down in Christian tradition and been true in printed Bibles today. And this just emphasizes how they're not us. How when we're looking at them, we're looking at their Bible is different. Their not only the selection of the books, but the text of the books, the language of the books, the material of the books. Obviously, obviously the books are ultimately translated from Hebrew, but that's not even true for all of them, because you have books like 2 Maccabees and Wisdom of Solomon, which are written in Greek. So we saw the one bottleneck of what do you call it? Of technology change. Do you know why I call it a bottleneck?
Why?
Because whatever gets transmitted over that change of technology is what subsequently remains the canon. Whatever doesn't gets lost. We saw this when printing was invented. This happened such that, Midrash Tanchuma printed. Midrash, Birkat Rabbi Eliezer printed. Midrash Psikta Rav Kahana, for whatever reason, was not printed. And when it was not printed, even though Rishonim quoted all over the place, early Achronim never quote it, because since it didn't get printed, you're not really using manuscripts anymore. It didn't make it through the technological bottleneck. What survived, what didn't. Only in the 19th century, when scholars printed it from manuscripts, did it finally return to the tradition. So there's the first bottleneck we saw in Greek-speaking Jewry was the change from Hebrew to Greek and from animal hides to papyrus. But the second one is the invention of the codex. It opens like a modern book rather than rolling like a scroll. And moreover, what we also see is that the codices tend to be written in, certainly large codices tend to be written in animal hides. So you could have these very, very large codexes that are written of animal hide, and they can contain actually much more than an animal hide scroll. Yes, I know the Gemara in Bava Basra talks about a scroll of the entire Tanakh, but can you imagine how unwieldy that would be? It would be like 5 Sifrei Torah in one.
Right.
I mean, whatever they say in the house of Beitos Ben Zonian, there was one. But it's not really practical. But here, so where before we had the technology among the Greek-speaking Jews and then early Christians had space for less material than that of the Hebrew-speaking Jews in Eretz Yisrael and Bavel. Here, suddenly, there's room for much more material, and the Christians are among the earliest adopters of the Codex. Later, the Muslims and the pagans, and only much later, the Jews. Here's some pictures. Here's the Codex Vaticanus. You see how it's these enormous, you can't really see, but this is an enormous page. And it's all these 3 columns of these little letters. This is the opening of Malachim, I think. Hi, Egeneto, Meta.
It's in Greek.
No, it's not Malachim. It's because it begins, and it was after the Meta to Tapo Tanenu something Dawid. Yes, it is the beginning of, well, it's not the beginning of Malachim, it's the beginning of it was after the death of David. That doesn't even make sense. There's no such pasuk. I know they begin in a different place, but does that even that's how their pasuk begins? Because there are different breaking points. We'll see this in a moment. Vision of the books in Greek Bibles. So this is the explanation of what we were saying with the 4 with the four books of kingdoms. Binyamin, can you read this?
Yes, sir. 4 books of 1 kingdom, 2 kingdoms, 3 kingdoms, and 4 kingdoms correspond to the Hebrew books Shmuel and Malachim. In some manuscripts of the Septuagint, such as Codex Vaticanus and Codex Alexandrinus, 1 kingdoms and 2 kingdoms are what we call Shmuel, and 3 kingdoms and 4 kingdoms are what we call Malachim.
That's pretty. That's clean. That's neat in terms of fitting with the Hebrew.
Right,
But,
and I think that's what Scott intuited before.
Isn't right?
Yeah.
But
In the Lucianic or the Antiochene recension, 2 kingdoms continues through the end of David's life. 64 verses is what we call Malachim.
so what you've got, it's not. You don't have Shmuel Malachim. You have 1 kingdoms. That goes till the death of Saul. You have 2 kingdoms. That goes to the end of death of David. So that's the remainder of Shmuel and the first 64 psukim of what we call Malachim. Then you have 3 kingdoms, which goes halfway through the remainder of, which goes into what we saw, the beginning of Achaziyahu ben Achav, and then 4 kingdoms, which goes to the end of the book. Now we're Latin. Originally, you had the Vetus Latina, the old Latin Bibles. They were translated from Greek by Christians who did not know any Hebrew. So by the late 4th century, the late 4th, early 5th, Jerome wanted to improve the Latin translations existing at the time. There are all sorts of competing, none of them necessarily so accurate translations in Latin of the Greek Bible. At this point, we mean both the Tanakh and Mahavdil, the New Testament, because these are Christians. So Jerome first redid the New Testament, and then he redid the Psalms based on the Greek, and then he realized that if he really wanted to do this project, he was going to have to study Hebrew. And he went to Eretz Yisrael, and he studied with a rabbinic Jewish teacher, and he really studied Hebrew. So he retranslated the Psalms, and he then translated from scratch the Hebrew Bible. It's actually very interesting that he reports various traditions in the name of his teacher, including in one place in his commentary on Ecclesiastes, Kohelet. He reports a medrash in the name of Rabbi Akiva that we don't have, that has not been preserved by us. But clearly it's real. I mean, this is not the kind of thing that a Christian would just make up. How would the Christian even know about Rabbi Akiva? Clearly, when he was studying, the Hebrew and the Bible with his rabbinic teacher, with Jewish teacher, the teacher told him this drasha, and only he has preserved it. I don't remember how it goes.
What year is it?
What?
Year?
Late 4th, early 5th century. No, and when Jerome came to translate, 1 kingdoms and 2 kingdoms and 3 kingdoms and 4 kingdoms directly from Hebrew to Latin, wasn't he in for a surprise? He found that doesn't exist in the Hebrew. There are only these 2 books, Shmuel and Malachim, and depending on which version of the Greek he had before, they may not even have lined up with how he. They may not even have lined up with how he had it. Now, if you stop and think, if the whole thing is just one huge unit that's divided, it does make a certain sense to break it after the death of David. No?
Meaning
that
once
Shmuel is the book of Shmuel and Shaul and David.
Once you no longer
and the
work
Malachim is
traditional
all the other
breaking.
kings. Now, I think the way we have it is extraordinarily dramatic, that it begins, the characters already, meaning Adoniyahu and Shlomo are mentioned, their births are mentioned in Shmuel. But They're not characters at all there. And while some of the characters at the beginning, though Sadok HaKohen, yes, is already in Shmuel, and he spans into Malachim. But it really, breaking it there really does start it is a great introduction to the monarchy, starting with David is dying. But again, we can understand another way of defining it. Here's a Renaissance painting of Jerome in his study. So Jerome begins his introduction. To many of his books, he has introductions in Latin, maybe to all of them, to his translation. So he writes, Tertia sequitur Samuel, quem nos regnorum primum et secundum dicimus. Third in the books follows Samuel, which we call first and second books of kingdoms. Because to his audience, they'd never heard of the book of Samuel. First, quartos Malachim, id est regum. He actually says, he transliterates the Hebrew, first in the book of Malachim, that is the book of Kings, which is contained in the third and fourth volume of Kingdoms. It is much better to say Malachim, my kings, than Malachot, perhaps Malchiot, kingdoms. For it does not describe the kingdoms of many peoples, but only of the one Israelite people, which consists of 12 tribes. He's saying the Hebrew title is actually a better title. And it only covers the second half of the book. The latter 2 quarters of it. So in the Vulgate, indeed, as in our text, he goes back because he wants to be authentic with the Hebrew. And there are 2 books, because that's what he translated it. So this is Codex Amiatianos of the Vulgate, about 700 CE. Nice big book. It's actually very clear. And you can see on the left, see where it is the red? Do you see where it's red on the left column?
Yes.
Incipit regum liber primus. Here begins the first book of Kings, not Regnorum, not Book of Kingdoms. Book of Kings, qui Hebraike appellatur Samuel, which in Hebrew is called Samuel, and then the first words are in red, opening the book, fuitur vir unos de Ramatayim, vayhi ish echad min Ramasayim, the opening of Shmuel. And the running title on the top is just Samuel. Again, this is 700 CE. This is 300 years after Jerome, but this is it's not that long after. And it's at least ostensibly presenting his Bible. Second book of Kingdoms, if you look, there's none at the second book of Kingdoms, right? That's what's in today's Bibles called Shemuel Bet, but classically it's just Shemuel, both for us and for Jerome. See, there's no indication. It doesn't say at the bottom, here ends the first book of Kingdoms, here begins the second. The scribe has nonetheless, though, put a red letter, a rubrication, on the top in the first word, indicating the scribe is aware that there's some kind of break here. So Jerome didn't succeed in completely erasing the Greek tradition from Latin Christianity. There's this awareness, as you see, there's that red word, but certainly the running title is still Samuel. In the third book, Incipit regum libertatius et quartos qui Hebraike dicitur Malachim. Here begins the third and fourth book of Kings. Same story. The running title is Malachim. Et Rex David senuerat. And the King David was old. That's certainly the beginning of our Malachim. That was our Haftarah this morning. Beginning in the fourth book, so it says finit at the end of 3 Kingdoms. See that on the left page in red, and there is a red first sentence afterward. But the running title you can see on the top is Malachim. I don't know if I can. Now you see it better. See it's. You see the running title. Yeah, I made it larger here. So, but it doesn't say here ends the first book, here begins the second book. There's that one line word finit. Again, as I said, he didn't entirely erase the consciousness of the earlier Greek-speaking Christianity of the divisions, but it's clearly he's indicating it as one book. Incidentally, within Greek-speaking Christianity, which simply maintained the Septuagint, to this day, Eastern Orthodox Christians, there's just, 1 kingdoms, 2 kingdoms, 3 kingdoms, 4 kingdoms. Meanwhile, what's going along with the Jews? Remember these from the beginning of this year? I'm showing you much bigger here.
Right, no break.
These codices I showed them at the beginning, but now we're here, we're right there in the Middle Ages. And 10th, 11th centuries, these, you see, the Jews have not changed anything. Right? But, okay, so we saw these manuscripts from the Middle East, these famous Masoretic codices. What about Jewish manuscripts from the West, say from Europe? British Library, 13th century Ashkenaz. You see, the modern librarian has written in English on the side 2 kings. I think we can agree that's probably not the medieval Hebrew scribe.
It's a safe bet.
Yeah. How about here? 1300. Kechol asher asa aviv. You see, he says that has the self pasuk as a vertical line rather than the 2 dots. But kechol asher asa aviv v'vayiv shamo av Yisrael. Hold on, there's something in the margin in Hebrew. But if you look, it's a slightly different color of ink.
Right.
Somebody later.
And what did there isn't, right.
Could be any time. Could be, I got this picture off the Ktiv site a year ago. It could have been written 2 years ago. I'm saying, I don't think it was written 2 years ago, but it could have been written 150 years ago. Like, just because it's in Hebrew doesn't mean it's not a modern librarian. I mean, the language of Chelek Sheni would be weird today, but it could be 500 years ago. Well, we'll see. Point is that the actual scribes, when you're looking in, there's no break. Have you heard of this guy, Stephanus Langton? Have you heard of him?
No.
He's important. He's in England in the early 13th century. And while I didn't find any source, any like really reliable, or certainly when I first heard about this, certainly over 20 years ago, I heard that the divisions were made by Stephen Langton. This is what you find in all the encyclopedias. Again, I have not been able to research to see what's the earliest source of this claim, but this is the usual claim that he divided. Before then, the Bible was not divided into chapters. There was just, if you wanted to refer to something, you'd say it's in the book of Genesis. So he wanted to make it easier to reference things. So he divided into chapters. And the chapter divisions, for some reason, they don't go through Samuel and Malachim straight, but rather each, the Greek 1 kingdoms, 2 kingdoms, 3 kingdoms, 4 kingdoms, he numbers them each separately. This turns out to be more important than you think. Who cares that he numbers them separately? Well, we'll see. But we saw in that manuscript, the Codex Amatianos, that there was some indication of the splitting, right? The red letters at the beginning. Mm-hmm. So there may have been manuscripts that actually indicated them in much more egregious ways. He may have had a manuscript that still used the Greek names and that used the names 1 kingdoms, 2 kingdoms, 3 kingdoms, 4 kingdoms. I'm not sure. Point is, this is how he numbered them. Then, in what year is this? Rabbi Yitzchak Natan. He is in the I'm not sure. I think 15th century. He writes I don't know why he calls him Reb Mordechai Natan. That seems to be a mistake. But Reb Yitzchak, this Hebrew author, he creates a concordance so that you can find Uvo Timtza Kolel Mispar Kol Asher Hashim Uvayura Milot Amorot Bechamurot, i.e. difficult, Mikol Mikra. Umilot Meshutafim Mikol Sifrei Arba Esrei. He certainly calls it the 24 books. But v'gam ken timtza b'niklei hapsukim al makomotam mikol parasha u'parasha. We'll show you. You'll be able to find the psukim from everything from each parasha. Uvechama psukim mikol kapitula. Notice he doesn't use a Hebrew word there. It doesn't say parak. He says from every chapter. Capitulum being the diminutive of caput, head, little head. In Yiddish, of course, we get in German, and then in Yiddish we get the word kapitel. Point is, it's not a Hebrew division. Now, why does he give references by the Christian chapter numbers? Because that's what there is in the Torah. You can say, this is in Korach, or this is in Shlach. But in Nevi'im and Ketuvim, it's really hard. If you say this is in Eov, that's a long book. So he gives the Christian chapter numbers. He also numbers the verses. So when Stephen Langton divided into chapters, he did not number the verses. But he divided the chapters, and then Yitzchak Natan divided, I think it was in Italy. Maybe Spain, but no, Italy, yeah. He counts. So if he sees that there are 24 Hebrew verses in this Latin chapter, that's where when you say like Genesis 32:4, that's a combination. The 32 comes from Christians, the 4 comes from Jews. Now, if there are any discrepancies in the psukim numbering between the systems, it would end up being following the Hebrew psukim. So what does he do? Stephen Langton divided. He had, the chapters. He doesn't say this is in Samuel chapter 52. He says it's in 2 Kingdoms chapter 13, 12, 11, whatever. So he divides it into Chelek Aleph Mishemuel, Chelek Bet Mishemuel, Chelek Aleph Mimalachim, Hu Chelek Gimel L'Ma'atik HaLatin, Chelek Bet Mimalachim, Hu Chelek Daled L'Ma'atik HaLatin, because the Latin translator has in the versions that he's copying from, it has 1 kingdoms, 2 kingdoms, 3 kingdoms, 4 kingdoms. And so he calls our kings corresponds to 3 and 4 kingdoms, and he divides Shmuel into 2 because you can't use the verse numbers if you don't do that. Not that it's 2 books, but Chelek Aleph and Chelek Bet. And remember, we saw that somebody had written in the margin Chelek Sheni. Here, somebody had written Chelek Sheni Aleph. Because they wanted to be able to give references. So because of this ability to give references, you had to somehow divide it. Then, First Rabbinic Bible, edited by Felix Pratensis, an apostate Jew. The audience, it seems they tried to sell it both to Jews and Christians, but the market was mainly to Christians. It's only the Second Rabbinic Bible, when they had Rabbi Yaakov ben Chaim ben Adoniyahu, a Jew, editing it. This became called the Textus Receptus. This is later Tanakhs descend from this text. It's the first Mikrot Gedolot. Now, both these indicate chapter numbers, and if you're going to indicate chapter numbers, you have to split them. Otherwise, you end up with things like Samuel chapter 60, aren't 60, but like 50, 51 or something. But do you see how tsanua it is? Do you see the picture? Scott, you see the picture how it ends?
Yeah.
The end is Shmuel. Vayikbru tachad ha'esh el bayabasha. Vayatzumu shivat yamim. There's a parsha break. Vayihi aharei ma'ot Shaul. Right? And there's just the it says Shmuel, and then at the top there's a little bet. And on the right where you see it gives a chapter number. It says there's a little aleph. It's very tsanua. It allows you to use it for, if you want to look up the number, you see, oh, this is 2 Kings 3, you can find it, but it also doesn't interrupt the retzef. But let's look at another Bible. This is the famous King James Bible. The English Bible. At the beginning of the first book of Kingdoms, it says the first book of Samuel, otherwise called the first book of the Kings. And then there's the second book of Samuel, otherwise called. Christians are dealing with these 2 systems at once. Their concern at this point is, are there 4 books? Are there 2 books or are there 4? Now let's look at, what is this? Why is this not showing? I'm too big. This is the Atias edition of Amsterdam 1659. Atias was the printer. Atias is, of course, a Jewish name. It's a Jewish Sephardi name. You may know people today with that last name. There certainly are. But the editor, Johannes Leusten, was a Christian. So he has put in the side, it's still pretty tsanua. You see for Malachim, is there a parsha break? Before Vayivsha Moav b'Yisrael. Do you see where it says Vayivsha Moav b'Yisrael? Vayivsha is the last word of a line?
And there's not.
There's no parsha break. But what is there? There's a big aleph.
Right.
But he probably does that for, I would have to look, I don't remember, but he probably has that for all the chapters. There's a big letter. But it says in the margin, Malachim Shein. It's a little less tsanua than just putting like nothing, and just putting a bet on the top of the page, but it's still pretty tsanua. 1659 Amsterdam, Atias. Just 5 years later, Mr. Atias printed another printing. And again, he has this Christian Leusten as the editor. What's here? This is a big change. This is the first time we've seen something like this of this extent in a Hebrew Bible. Kechol asher asa aviv liber secundus regum hebraike malachim bet caput uno caput primo aleph. That is a dramatic change. Just 5 years, same printing company. Now, I assume that to Leusten it wasn't a big deal. 1 book, 2 books. He's dealing both with Hebrew and Latin in his head, Why is it relevant? So in 1783, Yosef Pesselis is big philanthropist. I believe he's a banker in Vilna. This is an aside. This could be a whole shiur on its own. But over the modern period, we see anxiety in the poskim starting. You see it already a little in the Radbaz over 200 years before this, about the fact that we're using starts with that we're using printed books for Megillas. How can you make a bracha on Shir Shirim if you're using a printed book? And the Radbaz says we don't make a bracha because we're not using a printed book, because we are using a printed book. There's this sense that like somehow really there should be scrolls. There's an awareness that really there should be something different. And then you see, starting in Prague in the 17th century, you start seeing Sifra Haftarah scrolls, which again are not like a kosher book of Tanakh. They're a scroll that just has the Haftarot in them. But still, the idea is moving towards, it was inevitable that at some point someone was going to say, hey, maybe we should write Nevi'im and Kesuvim like straight on scrolls. It's very easy to say, well, of course, it would be the Gra. The Gra was a big Mechadesh. Yes, but the Gra also had something that others didn't necessarily have. He had someone bankrolling him. Whose idea was this? The Gra or Yosef Besselis? They probably talked about it together. It totally could have been Yosef Besselis said, I have some money and I want to, do something big. And the Gra said, we need scrolls of Nevi'im and Kesuvim. So Zayin Adar in Tav Kuf Mem Gimel in spring 1783, late winter 1783. They had a big party. They had a siyum. They hired, dozens of sofrim to finish all of Tanakh in a few weeks. And they did. They did not have access to accurate Masoretic manuscripts in Vilna. So the scribes, Mechos Brera, what did they do? They copied from printed Tanakh, including Amsterdam, 1664. Remember these? And these? Now see this. What do you see here?
Full partial break.
Yep. What do you see here?
Blank lines.
3 blank lines, as if it's another book. The quote on the side is from Shaul Seidler-Feller. This is Pashut insane.
Wait, do we know that wasn't written in by the original scribe?
What?
What's written on the right in red?
Well, yeah, it's not on the page. It's on the, I have it on the side.
That's how we know.
Yeah. Well, it's the ink color. You can see it's different. Right. And it is, from a certain point of view, insane. Because, again, in all of Jewish tradition all along, what have we seen? Is it one book or two?
One.
It's one.
Right.
Why are you breaking it here? There's not even supposed to be a parsha break there. There's nothing.
Wow.
I don't know if you'd call it insane. It's probably just ignorant. But what's going on here? Because the Gemara of Masro says it's ben chomesh lechomesh al Torah arba shitin. V'chein ben kol navi lenavi u'v'navi shel shnei masar kimol shitin. You're supposed to leave 4 blank lines. You see in the Sefer Torah. Vayisim baram Mitzrayim, then there are 4 blank lines. And, right, you end the book at the very end of the line on the left, and then you have 4 completely blank lines. In Nevi'im, as we're going to say, so it's actually a machlokas. I don't quote it here. It's a machlokas between Rashi and Rabbah. It's not really it's a girsa difference in the Gemara. Is it v'chein bein kol navi lenavi uvenavi shel shnei masar? You leave 3 lines because Trei Asar is really 1 book, or is it bein chomesh lechomesh is arba ashitin? Period. And then bein kol navi lenavi is 3 lines v'chein benavi shel Trei Asar shel shnei masar. Do you leave 3 or 4 in other Nevi'im?
Right.
This is why I'm not thrilled with writing Nevi'im together at all. Like, you see this sometimes. You'll see a Klafin as Yoshua and Shoftim together. I'm not thrilled with that because we have this machlokas, how many lines to leave. You can avoid the machlokas entirely just by having a Yoshua scroll and a Shoftim scroll. Anyway, Rashash, on that Gemara, he says, right, using Nevi'im Ksuvim Baklaf, because Vestam de Irenu, that's Vilna. Asher ben Shmuel Aleph leven Shmuel Beis Gimel Shitin v'chetzi chelek v'chein b'malachim b'malachim. So these scribes are leaving 3.5 lines at the end of Shmuel Aleph and Malachim, like this. V'nira deto b'tagte chada d'Shmuel kulai. First, what are you doing? Why are you leaving blank lines? It's 1 book. What are you doing? You're leaving 3.5 is not 4. and it's not 3. You're not Yotzei Rashi and you're not Siddur Tzibur. Aside from the fact that this is completely wrong because it's supposed to be one book anyway. In fact, Rav W. Yitzchaki writes that he found in an old shul in Tel Aviv, he actually found Nevi'im there were actually separate scrolls of Malachim Aleph and Malachim Beis. Again, from a scribe who didn't know and saw different books in the printed Tanakh. What? 19th century. So what goes on? How does this? What are the ramifications later? So while nobody is advocating today, as far as I know, writing, keeping blank lines, the Malachim Aleph and Malachim Beis, and as far as I know, nobody ever advocated it. It was just scribes did it because they thought it was 2 books. What there is a big debate about today is how do you write Nevi'im? What is the layout? Both according to the letter text and the parshas. Where do you break them? What kind of parshas do you break? It's an inner debate within the Litai community. Litai community in Israel is totally standard that you read the Haftarah out of a klaf. Like this is just, Eli Duker told me he was talking to his nephew, who's Haredi, I think was the story, and it was his Afrov, and he said, are you going to lay the Haftarah out of a klaf? And he gave him this quizzical look and said, as opposed to what? Out of a cell phone screen? So you have to, it's what we saw, that process with the Gra in the 18th century, it has completely normalized in that world. So that it becomes an important thing. How do you write it? So the so-called traditionalists, they say you write according to the traditional Litai scribes before Rav Breuer's research. Rabbi Yitzchaki argues there actually isn't any such tradition. You're copying from a scroll, and that scroll was probably copied from Brit Tanakh. And then if you have there's some list of dubious origin that goes back to like the 19th, could be traced at least as far as like the 1960s or something, or maybe even the early 20th century. And the traditionalists say it somehow comes from the Gra, but Rabbi Yitzchaki argues that it's all basically it's what scribes did, and they were based on printed Tanakh. They didn't know what they're doing, and you have to use Rav Breuer's research going back to the Keter and the old Masoretic manuscripts. Anyway, one of you've got this whole literature of Yitzchaki's writings and anonymous supporters, and then the traditionalist camp and supporters of them goes back and forth. There's a lot of pashkevil, and eventually it gets boring to follow it all. But part of Rabbi Yitzchaki's rhetoric is look at you say you have a tradition. Why do you have a break? Forget it. I'm not saying they do this, but they do this. And he says, why do you have a break there? It's totally obvious how this break came about. It's because someone was looking at this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Meaning there's no early Hebrew manuscripts that have a break there. You assume, what is this? There must be a break. There must be a parsha. So once you have that, he says that apostles your whole tradition. Once you argue that, what's going on? He says, Tselem b'heichal, he screams. It's like the Mishnah about Shiva Asar B'Tammuz. One of the reasons we fast, there's an idol in the heichal. What are these books? This is the Bible. These are our holy texts. You brought something from the printed thing printed by someone of another religion, and you put it into the Bible itself, into an otherwise kosher scroll of the Bible itself. Tselem b'heichal.
Wow.
So where does this leave us? Is it one book or 2? And if you have kids, what are you studying? They may say Shmuel, but they may say Shmuel Aleph. Like the idea that there are 2 books is with us. It's a result of these printed Tanakhs. And before that, it's a result of, it's not before that, it's simultaneously that. It's a result of the fact that we need the chapters because we need to be able to refer to things. It's also clear that the standard Jewish approach is that there's one book. Even the people who are arguing that no, we have to write according to the 19th century scrolls and we have to write according to these dubious Rishimas are not saying do this. Everyone would say that this is wrong and in fact puzzle. But nonetheless, it's with us. The fact that why did the scribe do this in the first place? Because we think of it. Many of us think of it. There's Malachim Aleph, Malachim Beis. What we began today was Malachim Aleph. So we see here how these ideas, these divisions, it started with Jews. We had the Alexandrian Jews who are not us. Their tradition petered out. It went to the Christians. For over 1,000 years, the Jews had no awareness that this is even a thing. It comes back because of the system of numbering and the printed books. And we see ultimately in some places it's a mistake, but it even enters scrolls, Jewish scrolls. Thank you.
Do you want to stop the record?
I want to stop the record now. How do we do that? Just a moment. How do I do this? Where is this? Do I stop screen share? What do I? Stop screen share, yeah? Okay. Stop record here.